Jessica Aries, welcome to Legally Contented. Please introduce yourself to our audience.
Yes. So thank you for having me, first and foremost. So I'm a lawyer turned digital marketer, and I really work with lawyers to help them enhance and perfect their digital brands online, as well as law firms to do the same. So I'm so excited to be here.
Jessica, I'm so happy that you are here because I am excited to listen to you tell me about trends in digital marketing and specifically multimedia thought leadership. I think so often law firms, really any professional services firm, but really law firms here for our purposes, focus so much on the written word when it comes to thought leadership. And I'm thrilled they do because as a ghostwriter of thought leadership for partners at boutique firms and large law firms, that's how I earn income. But there's a world out there of multimedia thought leadership possibilities that so few law firms and lawyers actually take advantage of. So I want to talk to you about best practices for creating multimedia thought leadership, best practices for distributing it and promoting it. And we'll also, of course, touch on AI because we can't have a legal marketing content conversation without getting into a little bit about AI. But before we get into that, I want to hear more about your background. You spent many years in-house at large law firms working in their marketing and BD departments. So tell me a little bit about that experience and how you got to become the owner of your own digital marketing firm.
Yeah, so I started my career actually going to law school. I have a JD and an LLM. So my LLM is in IT and privacy law. And at the time, my future looked like a lot of reviewing compliance documents and HIPAA contracts. And I just couldn't see myself doing that. I found myself really gravitating towards content, writing content, and actually working on digital marketing for the firms I was at. And so it just felt like a natural progression to move into marketing. And it worked really well for me. And I started in-house at a small B2C type firm that was very high volume. So think much more of kind of like the guerrilla marketing, much more the SEO, the pay-per-click type of marketing. And then eventually transitioned into working at a B2B firm doing much more of the kind of RFP writing and drafting responses to proposals and writing pitches and things like that. And then eventually migrating into actually BD technology. So running business development technology at an AmLaw 200 firm. And so working with them on just technology practices around how BD technology can be leveraged to grow a book of business and be used as a research tool and as a way to build relationships. And then migrated from there over back to a kind of smaller boutique firm and was promoted to the executive director of the firm, worked there for about 3 years, and then was furloughed from my job in the pandemic and was like, what am I going to do? I had just had a baby and I had a whole long process of just like, okay, I'm going to do it now. I'm going to have a baby, do that whole process. And then bam, the pandemic hits. And I remember thinking, is motherhood hard or is just the pandemic hard? And I realized it's a little of both and decided, well, what better time than to launch an agency in a time when I didn't have the income coming in because I was furloughed, and thought this is an opportunity to leverage my skills and work with a lot more firms, essentially. And that's basically how it kind of progressed. And because I have such a strong BD technology, digital marketing background, it just seemed natural because many firms were reaching out to me saying, how do I do digital marketing? How do I build relationships with clients when I've never even really thought about thought leadership or how to promote it properly and how to set up a strategy around really building leads coming in from just the things that I have already on my website. So that's how I launched my agency. And we're now 9 people. We've been around for about 3 years. And yeah, we're very robust in terms of our ability to create content and help our law firms create content and strategy that really helps them generate visibility and really grow their profiles in the places that matter the most to them. So
it's funny how you connect entrepreneurship with parenthood, because I often tell people, having been out on my own for 7 years now, I tell people that if having kids is like reason number one or cause number one of changing the way you see the world, then the second leading cause of changing how you see the world is running your own business. And you just see the world so differently. You see relationships differently. You see just the actual trading of time for labor differently. It's a whole world kind of lurking in plain sight. But if you are not a business owner, you don't see it.
It's so true. For especially in a pandemic. On top of that, so being alone with a newborn, my husband was working at the time, and I remember because I was in this flex role, just trying to figure out, am I just bad at this? Like, am I just bad at being a mom? Because I would feel so like drawn to actually the intellectual activities of like going back to work, but not necessarily having that as an outlet in those moments. But I think launching my business became that outlet, and I raised two babies at once, and it was kind of a beautiful kind of transition because now I have a lot more flexibility, a lot more time to spend with my daughter, but also a nice business that I've built for myself, and for the people who I work with. So it's an awesome experience.
If you think about it on a deep philosophical level, the idea that you create value for clients, they pay you, and you are able to pay vendors, you are able to pay your employees, your contractors. It's a whole kind of beautiful cycle that sometimes when we get into discussions about capitalism and the economy, and people view it as problematic. For the small business owner, right? Not the large mega corporation, but for the small business owner to be able to create value that helps people and then take that value and help other people by literally putting money in their pockets, helping them feed their families. I think it's one of the highest callings you could have as a human, as a citizen.
Well, and I found myself actually in the position of finding others who were like me, who had been furloughed or put, on some kind of, lesser hours, diminished hours for whatever reason in that moment. And I said, "Come work for me, come." And now, those people, I think there's a lot of loyalty that gets built there. But then on top of that, they're like my right and left hand people, and they really run the agency when I'm not able to be there because I'm speaking or traveling or take time off. Like I do get to take time off now. We went to Hawaii, we went to Disney World, like all of those types of experiences I've been able to do. But then on top of that, I can go back to my team, and every time we have a client or a prospect who comes in, we can say, is this someone who we want to take on? We can evaluate them. We're no longer beholden to the idea that the firm owns our time. We can say, as an agency, is this someone whose values we want to advance, someone's business who we want to, because at the end of the day, we have more demand than we have supply, and we get to be a little bit more selective. And so it's nice in being able to say, is this someone we want to support in their growth of their firm? Do they have similar values to us? Is this someone who is going to model the behavior we want to see, especially in a place like, there's TikTok Reels. Those, we do a lot of video marketing. So we talk a lot about the personalities of the people we could potentially work with, and whether or not that's a personality that should have so much visibility and the microphone in front of them and the ability to grow a huge following. So.
And that's a great thing. We'll end the entrepreneurial talk now, but that's a great thing about running your own business, is getting to know what kind of clients are the best clients, what kind of work is your best work. And if you're in the position to do so, reducing, actually, not expanding, but reducing what you do to only that thing or those things that you are best in the world at, that people can come to you and no one else for. And you can really develop your systems, your processes, your marketing, and really fine tune everything you do because you made a decision. We are providing 3 services, not 27, and we're going to be fantastic at all 3.
Spot on. 100%. And something we even tell our lawyers when we're working with them on digital marketing. It is very hard to market to everyone. In fact, you don't want to market to everyone because not everyone can afford your services and not everyone is a good fit. And so it's good to be selective.
And on that note, let's talk a little bit about multimedia thought leadership. And we'll start with what you are seeing in terms of the problems clients are coming to you with, the solutions that you're seeing that help with those problems with respect to print content. We'll call it electronic content as well on the web. What are you seeing from your clients, both large and small, in terms of what they're struggling with, and how is your firm able to help them or at least guide them through the process to hopefully get to a better result where they don't have that problem anymore?
I think a lot of it is they come to us when they are doing the work and they don't know if it's effective. They have no way to really measure the success of it. And if they are measuring it, they might not always be measuring the right data to give them good insights into whether or not it's effective. And so one of the first things that we'll do when we sit down with a new firm or a new client who's going to work with us, if we're doing individual kind of marketing or we're working with the entire firm, is an audit. Is just understanding what data they already have and where there's gaps or where they've misinterpreted the data. And there's opportunities for them to be a little bit more strategic or think a little bit differently about the data. And I think that's an area, I mean, I feel like a lot of lawyers think they're doing a lot of marketing when in reality, I think they are missing a huge opportunity to actually amplify the marketing they're doing. We'll talk, I know, a bit more about that, but they'll put in so much time writing this client alert or drafting, a presentation that they're going to give at a conference, and then they don't really leverage it the way that they could be. So a lot of it is us sitting down, looking at the data and seeing where there's opportunities to really amplify the impact of the things they're already doing.
We'll talk about AI down the road, but are you seeing law firms already today requesting, asking for more generative AI imagery than the typical, Shutterstock or stock images or even custom photography?
Not with imagery yet, because as you may have noticed with things like Midjourney, there's some issues with hands and some issues with copyright, intellectual property law. So I haven't had as many firms come to us say, generate something for me on Midjourney that's really unique and different. More of them are just at the place where they're like, what's possible? I get asked that the most, like, how can I actually leverage this? I know I should be leveraging it, but what should I be leveraging it for? Where is it a good use of my time to actually explore, invest, train my team on using generative AI? So I don't find that they're necessarily saying, create a generative AI image for me, more so than saying, how can we get better at using some of these tools so we can use them more strategically?
And would the same thing go for content? Are you having your clients or having prospective clients come to you and want to know, hey, can we ramp up our production of content, whether it's social media captions, whether it's blog posts, whether it's attorney bios on the website? Can we ramp up our production through ChatGPT or other AI writing tools?
Yeah, yes, some of them are asking those types of questions, but more of the questions are around leveraging it for a deeper purpose. So for example, I already know I can take, a client alert and throw it into ChatGPT and say, summarize this. I think most of the marketers who are coming to us in the CMOs, marketing departments are using it in that way. They're trying to understand, though, how to take it to the next step. So how can we go deeper with ChatGPT? How can we have it take an existing process we have that maybe isn't that effective and make it better? So the best example I can give is I actually have a use case in a presentation I give where I show how if you actually walk through using ChatGPT and creating a persona within ChatGPT for your client base, you can take that information and say, okay, ChatGPT, take this persona and tell me if my website copy will convince this persona to potentially reach out to me over one of my competitors. And so doing that kind of level of analysis where we're taking content and we're actually saying, ChatGPT, help me process this information, help me better understand where there's gaps in what I've already built that maybe can be improved, can be elevated, can be enhanced. And that's where I think more firms are coming to us saying, okay, what can we really do with Gen AI? How can we stretch the tool? So
I don't have many lawyers or law firms coming to me about using AI with the thought leadership content because so much of it is unique to them. It's the way they see the world. It's based on their knowledge, but also their wisdom and their experiences. So I don't really have many instances where I can talk to the clients off the ledge or up the ladder in terms of using it. But I try to remind them that it's not, one size fits all with AI, and that you could use AI for maybe topic generation, right? If you want to cover some aspect of state attorney general litigation or some kind of issue with IPOs or the healthcare industry, you can plug in some prompts and try to get some topics. You could, of course, use AI to help you with the actual substance, like find me a report regarding XYZ published in the past 5 years that I can use to support the following proposition. And maybe that moves faster for you than you Googling or doing your online research or through Lexis or Westlaw. For a third, you could use to actually write. I mean, there are some programs out there that you can upload bullet points, upload your outline, and it'll write prose as best it can. Probably won't be great, but at least it gives an attorney or another person who doesn't want to sit down and stare at the blinking cursor on a blank Word document or Google document, it gives them a head start. which for many attorneys is all they need, right? Just give me words that I can then blow through and rearrange and edit, but at least give me a starting point so I'm not staring at a blank screen. And then fourth, I joke all the time that most of these attorneys are already using AI through their spell check or their grammar check. It's built in, right? It's built in. Or maybe they want to use Grammarly, or they want to use some kind of SEO optimizer. AI can come in on the back end, help you with your style, your grammar, and it's not as quote unquote destructive, or problematic as if it was pulling wrong information. But it still is a nice way to help you on that back end with your style, with your grammar, with your SEO or other optimization. So AI is wonderful, but it's also important to realize there are different ways to use it. And it's not just, I am definitely going to use AI or I am definitely not going to use AI. There's always middle ground. I think to your point, more attorneys and more firms are seeing, hey, look, we can use this to summarize articles. We can use this to generate ideas. But maybe we could use it to also see connections in our CRM that we can't see because we don't have access to LinkedIn, to like the back end of LinkedIn where we can map connections easily. But AI can help us maybe do that. So yeah, it's fascinating that not just the marketing, but the business development opportunities that AI can provide.
Exactly. And that's, I think, where I like to play in the data. So I think that coming from a BD tech background where we were already trying to, when I was at the firms I was at in the past, connect ERM and CRM data, now we're able to take, even LinkedIn content, export it, and then upload it and say, is there a correlation between certain types of engagement and the hook I used in this LinkedIn post? Or is there a correlation between certain hashtags and the number of views I'm getting on some of these posts? Because there's a lot of people who claim that they understand how the algorithms work, but when you can actually take your own data and process it within a tool like ChatGPT and actually see for yourself, yes, there is, like, the algorithm must preference this or that. It just makes a stronger case for using some of those tools more strategically and using things like hashtags, using a strong hook, using white space, even rethinking through, if you're going to write a LinkedIn post, the length of it and whether you use emojis or graphics, all of that can be evaluated just by uploading the data and analyzing it. And so that's how I personally like to use it, is kind of go into that mode of saying, what can we actually prove the algorithm is caring about, and then use that to our advantage with our clients.
What kind of results do you get if you were to plug in the posts and ask the questions of ChatGPT, of Bard, of another AI program? What actually is the output? What does it tell you? Yes, you're right. Or does it actually give you more detail?
So we actually use a lot of plugins with it. So we like to use a plugin called Diagram that will actually spit back out like heat maps for us and information that shows correlations between different data. I'm a big data visualization nerd. So I love to take that information because I believe data can always be better expressed in a visual. If we should be expressing in a visual. So I like to take that and then explain, especially to a lawyer who's very busy. A graphic can be so much easier for them to process than a chart, right? So take that to them and say, okay, this is why we're doing it this way. The data is showing us. It's not just me saying, I think this is going to work, right? It's like, here's what the data is showing. And data is so much more compelling and is more motivating, I find, to lawyers and law firms to actually make those changes and shifts in the strategy and the things they're doing. So typically when I'm putting a prompt into ChatGPT, I'm expecting it to give me some kind of response that then I can iterate on and use in some form of visualization or in some kind of use case as to why we should take a certain approach over another.
It's amazing how helpful graphics can be when even you're discussing the most basic thing, right? But to prove a point, if you need to have bar graphs to be able to show that one attorney is greatly outpacing other attorneys, greatly outpacing their colleagues with LinkedIn posts or with their engagement, you see the numbers on paper and you say, okay, well, I see the numbers, but you actually see it on a graph or a chart, you're like, okay. And I think it's important, even when lawyers are getting into their thought leadership, right? Getting back to the substantive thought leadership and multimedia, we can display things graphically. We can display things with charts, with graphs in a way that communicates easily to the reader what we're saying. And thought leadership is funny in that the easier of a time that the consumer of it has in terms of understanding it and embracing it, the better a writer they think you are. Even, right? Like it's like the idea where someone thinks that you are the coolest person to speak with at a dinner party if all you do is ask them questions about them and you never talk. It's the same thing where if you make it easy for people to understand you, you will be perceived as a great writer, even if, maybe you're so-so. But again, talking about tools and ways to help with multimedia thought leadership, graphs, charts, I think are immensely helpful. I feel like we might be past the high days of the infographic, but are you asked often based on your clients to be producing or helping them produce research reports where you've got a huge kind of asset that can be sliced and diced for video, podcast, article, white paper, blogs, etc.?
Yeah, we're doing things like that. We're and using those sometimes as, white papers, lead magnets, things like that. But beyond that, we're also reminding them of the importance of maybe we're past the infographic stage, but we're not past the carousel stage in LinkedIn. So if you can make it into a carousel, we see engagement rates go up through the roof on those types of posts. So we're reminding them that the way people consume the information is different across different platforms, and even what's trending changes. And so if you can meet your clients with kind of the new trendy way, you can get your point across faster and in a way that's easy to digest, especially if it's something like a carousel post where, there's only so much space on each of those graphics, but people will spend time scrolling through them. If you can put it into one of those posts or in that way that's easily digestible, you're going to get way better engagement, and people will remember your name associated with that carousel if it was something that was impactful. So yes, we're getting requests for things like white papers, we're getting requests for things like graphics, but then beyond that, we're always trying to break it down into smaller chunks, into smaller takeaways, and even things like you were mentioning how graphs have such an impact. I try to explain the importance of watch time on videos to lawyers, especially because we do a lot of TikTok and Instagram reels with a lot of the lawyers we work with. And that watch time graph is so compelling. I'll take a screenshot of it and I'll be like, our hook wasn't strong enough. We need to work on those, because you can see when people lose interest. And so that kind of way of representing the data and showing it and explaining it, I think is just so much more compelling and easier for lawyers as well as for their clients to understand these really complex, sometimes legal topics, right? I used to work in public finance. So when I was in-house in a law firm, I worked with the public finance lawyers. And I remember one of our best visuals we had was actually a visual of the state of Texas with a bunch of counties filled in with how many we had worked on bond type elections with. And it was such a compelling graphic because it took this giant state and highlighted it like 90% red and was like, see, this is how many people in Texas we've worked with. So if you haven't been our client yet, you should come on board. And I think that's just visual communication is such an important piece of that.
So on that visual point, you mentioned videos. We'd obviously be remiss if we didn't get into short form video, long form video. What are clients coming to you with in terms of their video issues and how are you helping them? Because unlike social media, in terms of the text social media blog posts, unlike thought leadership, you can't really hide when there's a video, right? You could have people help you with a blog post or an article or social media captions, but for the foreseeable future, until AI is much better, right? It's going to be you in front of the camera. It's not going to be your avatar in front of the camera. So how are you helping attorneys who are literally camera shy get in front of the camera and understand that all you have to do is just talk right into those little holes on the back of your phone and you could reach a world of people that you're not reaching currently?
So in terms of the problems lawyers are coming to me with, they're realizing and they're seeing the transition of social media from kind of this text heavy, graphic heavy way of doing social media to more of this video based way. I mean, if you've seen any of the Instagram reels, algorithm changes. There's numerous ones, but the main takeaway is that video is now king. And at least on Instagram and on places like TikTok, that's really the only way to communicate. So it's helping them understand the importance of having a personal brand and being the face of their brand for their firm, that people want to do business. And I know this is said over and over and over, but I'm going to say it here again. People they know, like, and trust. And at the end of the day, the best way to create that rapport and that relationship is on video, is by talking directly to the audience as if they are sitting across from you in your conference room talking to you about their legal issues. And so we try to explain that to them, and they're coming to us because they're seeing their competitors get work from, or even take work from them that they normally would have gotten, because their competitors have already built that rapport or built that relationship, established that trust. And so when we sit down with them, we're talking to them about the importance of doing that. When it comes to actually filming and getting comfortable on camera, we work with them a lot. So the number one thing we remind them is they need to feel like they are sitting across from the person at their table. And so this like high video production thing isn't really what works on Instagram Reels or on TikTok or even on LinkedIn necessarily right now. We're seeing when people are actually like walking around, making their coffee, talking at the camera like you're sitting next to them, that's actually what connects. And so we try to remind them that it's not about being stuffy or getting everything 100% perfect. It's more about delivering that value, creating that relationship, and making it feel like you're chatting with them. We do have some of our more camera shy lawyers take a teleprompter and film a few times delivering the same lines, and then we edit down the videos so that we get it the right cadence, and so they're not so stiff maybe on camera, especially with their first few recordings, things like that, to kind of help them get comfortable with the idea of a camera. But we want it to feel very much like you're having a conversation with them in their office. So that's how we approach it.
That trend of the get ready with me videos or the applying makeup videos, just as a man who does not put on makeup, it is amazing to watch the transformation. But also, people don't realize the ability to talk through like an employment law issue while you're putting on makeup. Now, maybe you could both do either. You could do either independently without thinking much. But to combine, it's like tapping your head and rubbing your belly at the same time. Like that's impressive. And we had Paige Sparks on a couple episodes ago, who is very big on TikTok and Instagram. I told her the makeup videos are just amazing. And she said that was one of her first big viral ones, was her talking about some employment law issue while she was putting on makeup. And people were like, amazed by it. It's funny, the lack of polish that some of these videos have. I think there's a fine line, because yes, you don't want the stuffy attorneys talking in front of the law books or like shaking hands and opening manila folders. Like that's kind of all played out. But it still never ceases to amaze me how many attorneys don't invest $100 in a microphone or have their company pay for it, or invest $200 in lights or have their company pay for it. And the difference that a microphone or lighting could make. Obviously, if you're outside, the sun's on you, different story. But when you have attorneys even attending webinars or doing podcasts, and they're on like speakerphone or they're talking through their computers, microphone, and speakers, I'm a snob when it comes to content. It rubs me the wrong way. It almost shows the person you couldn't even take a few, a little bit of forethought to put on a much more polished appearance. And again, you could be smart and you can be helpful in darkness or in brightness, but it just adds a little bit more punchiness to, I think, the presentation when you have lights and you've got a microphone. It just makes you seem a bit more on top of things. And I think that comes out often with content.
You're absolutely correct. In fact, I think attorneys are a little behind in actually getting up to speed on that part. I actually had to coach an attorney just a few weeks ago who was on a major news publication, and I said, "We need a microphone. Like you sound like you're being recorded through a webcam, and this is a major news outlet that is recording you, and you've got to invest the $150 in the microphone because you're going to sound so much better." And there's a huge quality gap between when they transfer from the newscaster to you, and you're suddenly kind of tinny, you sound off. Like, spend the $150, get the microphone, attach it to your lapel, you're done. Hook it up through the computer. But then I think on top of that, it doesn't cost that much to set up kind of these studios. Like, just to show you as an example, like I'm going to turn my lights off, the difference between no lights and lights, because I think it has a real impact when you can see the actual visuals. So no lights. This is what I would look like if I was talking to you without lights. this is the power of good lighting. And I think this setup was $250. So not like crazy. I'm not talking like thousands of dollars or anything. And it has a huge impact on the quality of my visuals, the professionalism that's hopefully displayed here, as well as just the fact that the lighting's in the right place so that my glasses aren't going crazy, like taking that little bit of time to do that research, or to hire someone like you or me who can like say, hey, here's some few tips that can really make a big impact on the quality of your video, especially if you're going to be on a major news outlet or a podcast that has quite a few views. Think about how much visibility that creates for you, and you don't want to look unprofessional. So I love that you mentioned that.
There's a bit of personal branding here, which is if you as an attorney want to appear on a local TV station or a national TV station, or even if you want to do a Zoom or another video conference with a reporter, if you roll in there with lights and with a microphone, even if they don't use the video, you are communicating to that reporter, I've been here, I've done this before, I've talked to the media, I can give you the sound bites you need. And guess what? That reporter will come back to you again and again if you perform, because they know that you've been there, done that, and they've seen it firsthand. Same thing with clients. I mean, I think it's important for attorneys to remember, and they often forget this, but your thought leadership doesn't just compete with other law firms' thought leadership. It competes with the various tabs open on someone's desktop or laptop at any given point. So maybe it's some travel blogs. Maybe there's some influencer social media accounts that you are on. Maybe you're on Amazon at the same time. Maybe you're on the New York Times. You have all of these different media outlets, influencer outlets that have taken time and energy to refine their presentation. And while most attorneys are not going to be expected to be at the level of a Washington Post video or an influencer with 3 million followers, their video and their content, still you're in the neighborhood because you are literally one tab away on the browser from that. So attorneys, they need to understand that they are competing against heavyweights when it comes to content. And to your point, the lights make a difference. The microphone makes a difference. And that comes through in videos, obviously. It comes through in podcasts, which we'll cover in a moment. But it's just an overall branding thing where it's hard for me to take you seriously if I can barely see your forehead and your eyes on your webcam because you can't adjust that properly, even though you're on Teams meetings or Zoom meetings multiple times a day with your colleagues, right? If you want to keep it low-key, lo-fi for your colleagues, great. But when you've got a third party coming to you, even if it's a prospective client, I think it makes a big deal to show up nice in this box with lights, with sound.
Oh, beyond that, I can't tell you how many webinars I've watched. These are webinars that the lawyers have spent countless hours putting together this content, and they don't even have, even the slides themselves aren't even well designed. When you're sticking paragraphs of information on a slide that quite honestly should be a visual of some sort instead, or my kind of philosophy is no more than 6 bullets and 6 words per each bullet. Like, if it's supposed to be information that you want people to consume and actually understand and take away from that presentation as something that's memorable, lots of words on screen and bad lighting and bad sound is the fastest way to leave an impression that makes people think you aren't serious about the services you offer. And I don't think any law firm out there who's charging the billable hours that they do, the billable rates that they do, wants to look unprofessional in that way. So just take that time, that little bit of effort to design your slides, to send it off to, even a design team to design the slides if that's what's necessary, especially if it's a big presentation to your clients or your prospects who you want to convince to hire you.
Yeah. And when you throw in referral sources there too, and it's easy to think that a client might not care much about what you are presenting or how you're presenting because they are in the process of vetting various different firms. But for referral sources, you can't hide from them either, right? And I think referral sources, they will see attorneys who seem to have polish, whether it's other trial attorneys or on the B2B side, attorneys at white shoe firms. They'll see those firms' production values. And they'll say, well, I know Jessica has a great resume and she's been there before with these cases, but I don't know, Suzanne over there just seems to be more put together with her materials, with her social media. And it sends signals. That quality of content sends signals that we don't often want sometimes because they're subliminal, but they talk about our quality without really us being able to control that. It's just how it's perceived.
Well, and that's your best impression. Like, this is your first impression and your best impression, right? When you're leading a prospect to potentially hire you, that's you're supposed to be putting together what's going to be your, best impression of what working with you is going to be like. So yeah. I just think there's a lot of opportunity for improvement with a lot of those.
It's the digital version of people walking into a conference room with messed up hair, untucked shirts, too short pants, terrible shoes, and then people say, "I'm sorry, you are, and you are here for what?" So we've tackled a bunch of technology. We talked about the videos. Let's talk about podcasts, because podcasts are still growing. They give people a chance to actually have conversations where obviously not every video on social media is a conversation. It's often the creator talking to the camera, to the audience. What are you seeing in terms of your clients and their interest in podcasts? The podcast industry has suffered a bit post-COVID. You see some companies like Spotify not investing as much as they did in their podcast properties, their podcast IP. That's a whole different ballgame from what we're talking about. But what are you seeing with lawyers? Are you seeing more maybe direct-to-consumer lawyers interested versus B2B or vice versa? What's the state of the podcast game in terms of your clients?
Yeah, so I still think B2B is a great way to use a podcast, because you can invite your clients, you can invite your prospects on to have a conversation and actually ask questions like you just did. Like, what are your pain points? What are some of the issues that are coming up for you? But beyond that, you can also leverage it as a referral, like to find referral sources to refer you work in the future. And I think especially if you have kind of a more technical topic, like I remember when I worked in public finance, I used to listen to all the bond law podcasts, because I wanted to understand the terminology. I wanted to understand the key players. I wanted to understand what types of content they were creating. And it helps you create some fluency there and understanding what the popular topics are. But beyond that, for those that are really specialized areas, sometimes that's the only resource available is that podcast. And if you can brand yourself as the expert on that through a podcast episode, or even through podcasts, like creating your own podcast, why not? And if that's the area where you show the most expertise and where not everyone's comfortable on video, like if that's your best way of actually creating content for yourself, then that's kind of a no-brainer to me as a resource for you, because I feel like not all lawyers want to sit in front of a phone and do TikTok videos. And I feel like not all of them are strong writers, but they're really great conversationalists, and they're really great at showing their expertise by sharing stories and by talking to guests and by maybe having a second co-host that they can do banter with, right? So I think leveraging podcasts for B2B is really smart. I'm not seeing as many B2C firms using podcasts, because I think podcasts lend themselves more to kind of that higher level thought leadership. Whereas I think a lot more of the TikTok reels, those types of videos lend themselves more to the B2C client base. So where I'm seeing there kind of be a dramatic split is that area. So podcasts, LinkedIn, those are really the B2B, I think, and thought leadership in the form of writing, client alerts, things like that. Whereas B2C, my B2C clients are much more the TikTok, the Reels, lots of social on different platforms, not just LinkedIn. They use LinkedIn for referral sources, but much more use Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. I even had one that was asking me about WhatsApp the other day. So that's how they're leveraging those tools. And so there is kind of a split between what type of practice you have and who you're targeting.
And the portability of podcasts to me is also so important. Videos, you normally are watching it. It takes your attention. Obviously, if you're reading thought leadership articles, you are reading those articles. You are reading blog posts, whether it's on your phone or your laptop or your desktop, you're still reading it. Podcasts are in the background. You're at the gym, you're walking the dog, you're running errands, you're doing mindless work in the office. The person is there with you. They're literally very close to you. They're in your ears, coming out of perhaps your Bluetooth earbuds. So they're literally in your ears constantly. I see so many opportunities that attorneys often just ignore. On the B2B side, the idea that you and one normal host, let's take a B2B corporate law firm practice group. You got an M&A attorney, could have a rotating cast of other colleagues coming in to discuss this week in M&A, right? And even if it's 15 minutes, just giving their clients the equivalent of an audio client alert that's very topical, and it could be topical and very current because it's not meant to have a huge shelf life, right? We are meaning this to be for the week of October whatevereth, November whatevereth, and it's gone, right? And it's meant to be in that space. And then you can invite obviously industry people down the road, but that format to me is like instant thought leadership, right? We are telling you what's important about what happened in M&A deals, and maybe if there are interesting terms that came out based on public filings, to be able to own that to me is amazing. And on the flip side, so many business to consumer, the B2C type firms, criminal law, PI, in the rush to digital marketing, they've abandoned community marketing. And in the right firm, in the right firm and the right geography, it's not possible all the time. But if you wanted to be like, establish yourself as the go-to local Austin law firm or the go-to local Philadelphia law firm, and you create a podcast that was almost like a Chamber of Commerce podcast where you're interviewing interesting people in Austin, in Philadelphia, restaurateurs, artists, politicians, you then really, really amp up your visibility and your prominence because now you've got the mayor on, or you've got the CEO of a local Fortune 500 company, and you're not in a high pressure situation. Maybe you do it where you're sharing coffee, or maybe you do it over, a donut or a bagel or whatever your local city's food is. It gives you a great chance to connect. And again, people tune in not because they want to hear what's going on with the latest, bad faith insurer litigation, but they want to hear about what's going on in their city. It just happens to be a lawyer who's hosting that podcast.
That's a great point. You made me think of one of the firms I worked at for a long time had a very popular radio show that got moved to actually a podcast format and was partnered with that media company to be released as a podcast. And it was so effective because it was in Spanish. So it was predominantly speaking on issues that affected the Spanish speaking community, but it was one of the only resources within the community that was providing local news and updates in Spanish in a way that was compelling and interesting. And like you said, they were interviewing folks. They would even go out to like new restaurants and stuff and cultural events and talk to people who were celebrating, Colombia's Independence Day or whatever it was. And it gave a nice opportunity for the firm to kind of establish itself within the Spanish speaking community, but also then be a resource and be a place where they would get referrals for all types of legal work. It wasn't just the type of legal work they did, but then they could, hand that out, refer to other people that they trusted within the community. They brought on other lawyers who didn't compete with them, but also served the Spanish speaking market. So there's just lots of opportunity to relationship build there that I think sometimes we think of things that they have to fit within a certain box. And I actually think thinking outside the box, like you just mentioned, of thinking of being that resource, that go-to resource, is actually a brilliant way to market and is a very guerrilla marketing tactic that I think can be extremely effective.
It's very sneaky, right? Because other lawyers will see billboards. Other lawyers will be tracking the ad spend on Google, or they can go into your Facebook. They can go into the Facebook ads library and track what you're doing. But podcasts are very much under the radar, and you can be, stupid like a fox. Where, why does she have these podcasts about new restaurants opening in Austin? Who cares? Well, her audience cares, right? You can really slide in there under the radar and make a big dent in market share once you understand. What do you stand for? What do you want to be known for? Who is your target audience? And how can you build a relationship with them where they see you as someone to turn to when they have legal issues or with B2B business issues? So we've got videos, we've got print, we've got podcasts. We talked a little bit about the creating and some best practices for creating them. Let's talk about distribution and promotion in the time we have left, because as we mentioned before we went on the air, so many attorneys and really any professional services provider, they spend time on the video, on the podcast, on the article. They think it's fantastic. And they put it like on the mantle, and they walk away to put out the next fire that's related to their client work, and they forget about it, or they just post it once. What are your recommendations for how to get the most out of your content once it's actually created? How to get the most out of promoting it and distributing it?
Repurpose. I know you've had a few people say that before, but repurposing is so key. I mean, one piece of content, especially when you've spent the intellectual value of having to put it together, should never be only distributed in one format. because people consume information in so many different formats. And that's where I think it's so important to have different channels where you're distributing that information, from an email marketing to, short form videos to webinars, to, especially if you're doing a webinar, guys, you're spending all the time to put all of that together, slicing and dicing that into short form video using things, AI tools, like we were talking before we started this podcast about things like Descript. There's other ones like Munch and video.ai and Opus Clip. All of those will cut down your long form videos into short form snippets that you can repurpose across social media. Use those tools to repurpose that content, because you've already spent the time and effort to create it. Distribution is such an important key to making it really have the legs that you really hope it would, if you're going to spend the time creating it.
Way back, right around the pandemic, as it was in full force, I wrote a blog post. I couldn't find it in time while you were chatting, but it was like 16 ways to repurpose a webinar, because webinars were like a big deal. They still are, but they were huge. Everyone and their parents were on a webinar, or they were hosting one about their legal practice. And to your point, you spent the time. You might as well maximize what you're getting out of that by meeting people where they are. Many of your clients might be on blogs and social media looking at content. Great. Maybe some of them are on YouTube. All right. Maybe some of them are on podcasts. Okay, great. You can slice and dice. And this idea of being omni-channel, which is just taking advantage of every channel that makes sense, right? There's no need to be on, as you said, WhatsApp or some other social media / communications, right? No reason for Snapchat, knowing where you want to be. But once you know where you want to be, what's the strategy for creating the content that gets us to all of those places? What are you seeing with social media in terms of, especially LinkedIn, that move recently toward more personal content and away from the professional content? I will just out myself as someone who hates the personal content. I think it is pandering. I think it is like cheap thrills trying to get you to click like or to reshare. If I look you in the camera with almost puppy dog eyes and tell you about the struggles I've had running my own business, I understand why people do it. And I think it's important that people are vulnerable in certain circumstances. But in my view, you can only go to that well so often before you become someone who is like the boy or girl who cried wolf. But also, it makes me wonder, well, gee, so Jessica is really out there. She's vulnerable. She seems nice. But how do I know she can actually do what she does for a living? Because the other person over there doesn't have as much vulnerability in their content, but they're actually talking to me about best practices for digital marketing. And I know Jessica does that, but all she's doing is talking about how difficult motherhood is or how difficult life is. Where's that line for you?
So I think there's an important part of social media about building connection and building rapport. But I actually was having this conversation the other day on another podcast where we want to connect emotionally with people, but we need to be careful not to go into the realm of shaming or self-pity. We want to be empowering with our social media. So if you're going to share a story, there better be a happy ending. And that happy ending better have some value to it, or else nobody's going to read it, in my opinion, or feel like necessarily you do have the skills or tools to be that resource to help them in their time of need. And so I think it's really important to walk that line of, is this information something that's going to actually, at the end of the day, cross over into being something helpful? Or is this just me being like, woe is me? And if it's woe is me, go put it on Facebook. Don't put it on LinkedIn. That's my opinion. Woe is me does not belong there unless it's like, woe is me, I need to find a job right away. Like, I will admit that I was one of those people who put up a post when I was furloughed and was like, hey, I need a job. But my post was also very much like, here's how I can help you. It wasn't just, I need a job, like help me. It was, here's the skills I bring to the table. Here's what I can bring to your firm. If you need this help, I'm available for consulting. So I think it's important to remember that your audience needs to see the value in what you're posting and needs to be able to take something away from it, whether it be an action, a takeaway, okay, I now know I'm empowered to make a change, or if I'm feeling this way too, I can at least identify with that feeling and realize if Jessica can get through it, then I can too, and feel empowered by it. I would really avoid the content that's just woe is me though, because I, like you, can't even, or shaming, the like, I'm going to shame my former employer. Like, no, please don't. you know, that's not the way to remain professional. And I think build those connections and rapport with others. Now, there's a difference between whistleblowing and shaming, so I'm not going to go there. But the whole idea of using LinkedIn as a professional network, as a place where you can lean on those who you've built relationships with, but also do it in a way that's constructive and empowering. I think that is so important.
As many people like to say, this is 3D chess. We're not just talking about likes and reshares now in the present. We're trying to build something for the future, build our brand, build our presence as someone you could trust for what we do, or someone to hire down the road if I'm applying to a job that you are advertising. And to focus so much on the get clicks now type view, I think it hurts the posters in the long term, and it hurts in the short term and long term, but also hurts the service, right? Because now people don't want to go on Twitter, because if it's a cesspool, then you don't want to be part of all the negativity. And LinkedIn, in a way, it's great that it's pivoted away from a resume website to a live, great content website. But if you're curating your feed and you're actually there because you want to see what people have to say about what you do or the industry you serve, and it's clouded by people talking about very personal things, again, I know why they're doing it. I understand the role, but maybe that could be like 10% and not 90%, of the posts that they put out.
Yeah, and I also say be careful with selfies. Be careful with oversharing. There is a line. I think that you make a really good point about the idea that we don't want to go. Some of us don't want to go to Twitter anymore, myself included, because it does feel like it's such a negative space, and that social media is meant to be social at the end of the day. And if I don't feel like it's a place where I can come to learn, be entertained, or connect with others, then it loses value to me. And that ultimately means that those platforms won't be around in the future, or they'll end up like Twitter, and we don't want that.
It's a funny thing too, when you get to know people through social media, through videos and photos, and then you meet them in person. And you say, you know what? This person must have used a ton of filters throughout their social media posts, because I barely recognize them and I see them all the time on my feed. So it's funny too. It's like, be careful about some of the tools that can help you become what you think is a better version of yourself. Because when people meet the actual version of yourself, they might be rubbed the wrong way and say, you know what? I thought he was this way, but now I see him in person. I'm not sure if that's trustworthy because of how they've modified themselves online.
Oh, those AI headshots are the best example of that. We were speaking of AI, but in terms of areas where you can really get yourself into trouble, if you were, uploaded into the AI headshots, photos of you when you were, 30 pounds lighter and had longer hair and, had no wrinkles, it's going to spit out photos that look like that. And even though, that's what you wish you looked like, it's going to be very jarring to log into that Zoom call or to meet someone in person and realize that's not what they look like at all. And that's not what they sound like either. Well, I guess we're not using AI voice yet, but eventually we will. So,
or you make people wonder, like, did they get sick because did something happen? They just don't look the same as they do in that profile photo. I hope they're okay. So you almost create like worry on the part of people because they don't know what to think.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. I remember I've had to coach so many, this happens with men the most, lawyers who've lost their hair, who don't want to have a profile picture of themselves bald. And I'm like, but that's what you look like. And it is what it is. And it's okay to be authentically you on LinkedIn in terms of the way you actually look. So let's not use that photo from 30 years ago because you're not fooling anyone.
There are plenty of bald men who own it. There's no reason to be ashamed.
Yeah, look at The Rock. Look at The Rock.
The Rock, you want to go back a few years, Vin Diesel, you name it. There's plenty of people out there who you could look to for mentorship and people who have used their boldness to their advantage and are not worse off because of it. All right, so we talked about AI a little bit and we're running out of time. So I want to talk to you a little bit about AI just in the context of things you think law firms should be concerned about with AI, and not just ethics and copyright, but are there bigger picture issues that you're seeing with law firms in terms of how they're thinking about using AI and what maybe they're failing to realize, or some other trap that you might see law firms fall into based on them reading articles about best and wonderful uses of AI, and then trying to put those into practice at their firms, whether it's marketing, delivery of services, etc.
So I'm probably going to say something you didn't expect me to say, but I actually think the risk aversion to using AI and learning AI and leveraging it to enhance what you're doing is the biggest risk. People failing to actually try and experiment with it and learn it, because I'm a big believer that AI is like makeup. I say this a lot. It should enhance what you naturally already have. It shouldn't cover it up. So I think it's really important to remember that AI is only going to amplify what's already there. And if you're a bad lawyer, it's going to amplify that you're a bad lawyer. If you're a great lawyer, it's going to amplify that you're a great lawyer. And so most of the lawyers I know are great lawyers. So I think they should be leveraging those tools. I think most of the marketers I know are great marketers, and they should be leveraging those tools. But if you're one of those who's maybe not as interested in actually being good at your job, it's going to amplify that. So that's my word of warning. If you are one of those people who thinks AI is going to do your job for you, it's going to magnify the fact that you aren't doing your job. And that's really where I think people get into trouble. So my word of warning is don't be lazy. Skill up, learn the skills you need to learn to be good at your job, and then use AI to enhance what you're already doing.
Great. Jessica, thank you so much for your time today. Where can people learn more about you, learn more about By Aries?
Yeah, so I think LinkedIn is my favorite platform by far. So please come follow me there. I know you have all my social handles, but that's where I love to connect with people and share probably the most content. I also love TikTok, so feel free to follow me on TikTok as well. I know you have my social handles there too, but that's where I would recommend. Or you could just go to our website, which is www.byaries.com, and that's going to have links to all of my social handles.
And we will drop all those links into the show notes or description on this video or podcast episode. Jessica, thank you very much. I think I will see you around the Legal Marketing Association. Take care.
Bye.